Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to our new series, How to Suffer Well, Walking with the Saints and Extraordinary Christians. This is something that's been on our heart for a long time, and we finally feel like we're ready for it. I hope that you'll join us for the series. This is kind of an intro to it right now. So, we want to talk about how different these saints are going to seem to you when we look at them, because we're going to be looking at them from a different perspective, from the perspective of suffering that we can relate to. When we think of saints who suffered, our minds often go first to the dramatic. Martyrs in arenas, chains in prisons, fires and swords, and rightly so. The church has always honored those whose blood was poured out in witness to Christ. But as David and I have been sitting with the saints more closely, something has become quietly clear to us. Most saints didn't suffer dramatically, they suffered faithfully. They suffered in ways that look surprisingly familiar to us, suffering what we've experienced, suffering what could be our own way to possible sainthood. We often meet the saints at the end of their story, after grace has ripened, after holiness has steadied, after their lives make sense. But we rarely linger in the middle, where the suffering was ordinary, prolonged, confusing, and unseen. Take St. John Bosco. Most of us know him as the joyful priest, surrounded by boys, full of warmth and laughter, patron of youth, founder, miracle worker, a saint whose joy feels almost effortless. But behind that joy was exhaustion so severe that it nearly killed him. He lived under constant financial pressure, carrying the weight of hundreds of children who depended on him. He faced years of misunderstanding and opposition, not from enemies of the church, but from within it. His health collapsed repeatedly from overwork. He often slept only a few hours a night. He carried responsibilities no one else yet believed in, with little reassurance that his work would survive him. John Bosco didn't suffer in a dungeon. He suffered by being worn down by love. And once you begin to notice this pattern, you start to see it everywhere. Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton didn't suffer public martyrdom. She suffered the slow unraveling of her life, the death of her husband, the loss of financial security, the responsibility of children, recurring illness, and the ache of misunderstanding when she followed her conscience into the Catholic Church. St. Andre Bessette spent most of his life sick, weak, rejected, and assigned the most menial tasks. He was dismissed as useless, mocked for his simplicity, and humiliated repeatedly, even as God worked miracles through him. His suffering wasn't heroic in the eyes of the world. It was small, persistent, and deeply humbling. St. Francis de Sales, known today for his gentleness, endured severe scruples, physical illness, opposition, and deep interior struggle. His tenderness was not natural ease. It was earned through suffering patiently borne. And then there are saints like St. John Newman, who simply worked himself to death. He didn't die young because God took him early. He died young because love demanded everything his body could give. None of these stories fit into the dramatic categories we often associate with sainthood, and yet they're unmistakably holy. This has led us to a realization that feels both obvious and profound. All saints suffer, not just because suffering is good in itself, but because love in a broken world always costs something. Let me say that again. Love in a broken world always costs something. Suffering is not an interruption of sanctity. It's often the environment in which sanctity grows. For many saints, suffering didn't come as a single decisive moment. It came as attrition, daily responsibility, unanswered prayer, misunderstood obedience, physical weakness, emotional fatigue, or the loneliness of carrying a calling no one else yet sees. These aren't the kinds of suffering that earn statues, but they are the kinds of suffering most of us recognize, and they are the kinds of suffering that can be suffered well. That's why, as we move forward through the year, we want to look more closely at the saints, not only at how they died, but at how they lived. Yes, we want to honor martyrs and those who endured persecution. Their witness remains vital and necessary. But alongside them, and maybe even on our way to them, we want to shine a light on the quieter suffering, the kind of suffering that you experience: exhaustion from loving others faithfully, illness without immediate healing, obedience that costs comfort, perseverance when joy feels distant, faithfulness when fruit is unseen, because this is where most of us live. The saints were not spared these things, they were shaped by them. They didn't become holy by avoiding suffering, but by allowing suffering, when united to Christ, to soften them rather than harden them, to deepen their compassion rather than close their hearts. We can learn from them in our own situations, and this is the great hope the saints offer us. Not that suffering will disappear, but that suffering, when offered to God, can make us more capable of love, more patient, more attentive, more merciful, more willing to serve others from a place of humility rather than strength. Holiness isn't reserved for those who suffer spectacularly. It's forged most often in the quiet, unrecorded places where grace meets endurance and love keeps choosing to stay. As we walk with the saints throughout the year, we won't rush past their suffering to reach their glory. We'll linger, because in their hidden endurance, we may finally recognize our own lives and discover that God has been closer than we realized all along.